The Australian Bankers Association has poured cold water on reports that banks are planning to foreclose on farmers as a result of the release of the Guide to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. An independent banking report has warned that farms are at risk and at least 8 irrigation towns may not survive if the water cuts go ahead. Many local businesses are worried, with debts at record highs due to a decade of drought. Emily Stewart reports.
Water is the lifeblood of many bush communities, and less water for farming in the Murray-Darling Basin will flow through to local economies and businesses.
It's going to hinder our planning going forward. It's going to hinder our investment decisions in the basin. It's going to hinder our true assessment in relation to our balance sheet in terms of property values. It's probably going to hinder our capacity to raise funds. It might raise the cost of funds from the banks. We don't know.
The Murray-Darling Basin Authority's guide, released last week, recommends that the federal government buys back up to 4,000 gigalitres of water from farmers to be used for environmental flows. A report by an independent banking consultant looking at lenders found that because of the guide, banks are already preparing to foreclose on loans, and that investors consider the Basin Plan will increase political and regulatory risk for investment in Australian agriculture. But the Australian Banking Association says this is untrue.
We have spoken to all of the major banks and the regional banks today. We have put out a public statement that said that no bank is using the guide to the plan as a reason for changing any of its interactions with customers.
The report goes on to say that at least 8 irrigation-based towns, including Mildura, Griffith and St George, may not be viable without sufficient water for irrigation.
If 8 towns close, then you can be guaranteed that elders won't be having branches in those towns or in other places like that. And some of the towns we're talking about, these are major hubs for agribusiness for us and the whole of the Australian bush.
The authority says around 800 jobs could be lost, but community representatives across the basin say it's much higher.
The figures quoted for job losses in the authority report are way understated. In fact, it's ridiculously understated. In the small valley where I live, the Border Rivers, we can easily calculate a loss of 600 jobs in that particular valley. Extrapolate that out over the whole basin, you're talking potentially tens of thousands of jobs.
Irrigated agriculture production in the basin is worth around $5.5 billion to Australia's economy. Agribusiness giant Elders has 88 stores operating across the basin, and CEO Malcolm Jackman says he's concerned about the effects of water cuts on production.
If Australia suddenly starts ramping down its food production, that's going to have a huge impact on the Australian economy, and it is going to have a huge impact on how we feed this planet.
The banking report also indicates that lenders could be the winners out of the buybacks. It found banks will have a first right under their security arrangements with businesses and farmers to any amounts of compensation received.
Not necessarily the case. I mean, again, it's going to have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
The general feeling is that in the long term, big business will be able to leverage off opportunities for rationalisation.
Those that remain in farming will see some opportunities as a result of a scarcity of production, particularly food production.
But for most, less water will mean a smaller profit and possibly even foreclosure. Thousands of people have expressed their concerns at meetings being held across the basin, and the federal government will now set up a 6-month parliamentary inquiry into the human impact of the water cuts, headed up by independent MP Tony Windsor.